Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading property experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, and Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the 2014 and 2015 Property Investment Advisors of the Year.
All right, folks, you're on the Property Couch, where each week Ben and I bring you the insider's guide to property finance and money management. Hello, mate.
Mate, $199.
$199.
Oh, just so close.
Not out.
Not out.
Yeah. Big guest next week.
Oh, well, we're facing some, we're hitting and missing and, we're, having a shot. But no, yes, $199.
$199. So, I gave a little sneak peek on my Insta this week as to who it. So there was a spoiler alert.
Oh, don't go to your Insta. Is that what you're saying?
Well, you won't.
Look, there is absolutely no doubt that I'll be going to your Insta on the night. What is Insta?
Yeah. What is Insta? Yeah, isn't that something you scratch? But we are really excited about who we are going to talk to next week. So, folks, only one more week to go. But it's worth it. So check that out.
Yeah, very happy with our 200th guest.
Now, we were in Sydney recently and we got to sign some books in the George Street Dymocks. That was a bit of fun.
Yeah, it was a bit of fun.
But today...
Well, there's a few autographed ones at the airport too. So snoop around. Qantas Terminal. Okay. Just have a look if you want to get there.
You've been cruising around?
We have. Hey, Bryce.
Yes, Ben?
Mate, just before we move on, got an important announcement. I'm putting my picker hat on. All of those Western Australian friends over there, our Western Australian listeners, I am coming to Western Australia to be part of the next Picker Western Australian meetup in Perth.
Well, that sounds good, but will they let you in?
Well, hopefully they'll let me on. I mean, I'm a Collingwood supporter. You beat me. Come and give me ridicule.
Well, there's a very good point you raised, Ben, because here's a shout out to all of the West Coast Eagles supporters in Western Australia, and there's a lot of them. Turn up, because not only will you get to, I think there's Christmas drinks.
Yeah, well, Tuesday the 4th, Tuesday the 4th of December, the evening of Tuesday the 4th. Apparently, Ben, who's organising, Ben Green over there, so thank you, Ben, and the State Council of Picker over in Western Australia. I've been told to sort of talk about great access, easy train. It's on the train line. It's in Perth City. There's no stress, plenty of parking. And you can buy drinks there. So come and have a drink.
It's going to be social. You're going to get good information. You're going to meet some other like-minded people. And the West Coast supporters can heckle you at the end of the night to remind you of who won the premiership.
So find the details in the show notes, or just look under Eventbrite. So we've set up an Eventbrite so you can get the free tickets. Right. So obviously, if you're not a member of Picker, become a member on the night or get along, see what we're about, and hopefully you'll join up on the night.
Sounds like a good night, Ben. So for those of you in West Australia, do us proud. All the Sandgropers turn up and to a great event.
Terrific. Thanks, mate.
Hey, my Mindset Minute today, I want to give a little backstory because we were privy to a presentation recently by a 28-year-old when we were in the States who really impressed us. And the backstory was that he came, it was really interesting, got up on stage, he was really nervous, and he was talking about the fact that he was nervous, he's an introvert. His idea of a great flight is seeing a monk come towards him and sit next to him, because it means that they're not going to talk. That's how much of an introvert he was. And so, and I thought, I wonder where this story's going to go. But what he did is, in terms of building his backstory, poorest of poor counties in America, in the poorest of poor town. So conditioning for this particular gentleman was, you are going to go nowhere in life and don't even expect that you can get to the other side of the track. So it was a really, really impressive story. Now,
well, the expectation was if you have a job, you'd be well liked in the county, right? You know, like, remember he said he was so proud of his uncle because he was a postman, right? And he had a van.
Yeah,
part of his job.
So if you think like where you're at, this guy was really up against it, right? In terms of culture, norms, society, all that sort of stuff, and has now built himself to the position where he has 3 businesses. They are providing him with an income.
Yes.
At the age of 28, that would be the envy of most people around the world, I would have thought.
Yeah.
And the interesting part about it was he said he had an exit plan, which was different to everyone else's exit plan. And that exit plan was simply to build the business, so that he could no longer be needed on a day-to-day basis, although the business is still running.
Correct.
So my Mindset Minute today is something that he said in his presentation, and it was, you don't need to know how to do anything, you just need to know the result you want and be resourceful, right? Because then he later on went to say the fallacy that you need more knowledge or experience prohibits you from problem solving and taking action. And that was his big takeaway from that presentation. You just need to be a problem solver who takes action.
Yep.
And so the context for the Mindset Minute theme today is largely around, there are people in our community who listen to us who have already taken action, but there are also a very big number of people in our community who have listened to us, they understand the principles, they know what to do, but they're actually not taking action because they think they need to know something more before they get started, or something more before they need to get started. So my message is very clear to those folks. You don't need to know how to do anything, and this is Dylan's quote, right? You don't need to know how to do anything, you just need to know the result you want, i.e., I want a passive income or whatever it is.
Work back from a target.
And be resourceful.
Yeah.
You don't need to know everything. When I bought my first investment property, I can promise you, Ben,
Yep.
I did not know a lot.
No, I bought the house across the road from Mum and Dad. I didn't know much about that one either.
The fallacy that you need more knowledge or experience prohibits you from problem solving and taking action. So hopefully I'm speaking to the person who this is actually resonating to them in their earbuds, they're on a run, they're at the gym right now. I'm talking to you. You don't need to know everything.
Well, what did he do? When he didn't know, what did he do?
He got people who knew.
He outsourced.
He outsourced.
He leveraged
And-
their skill, expertise and knowledge.
He goes, and slightly off tangent just to demonstrate the point, he goes, I own a website design business. I don't know how to design a website. And the audience laughed, and he goes, but I know where I wanted to go.
Yeah.
I know how to problem solve, and
There's
I know
a
how to
market
take
opportunity
action.
there, and he's just taking opportunity to that market. Yeah.
So, folks,
Clever stuff.
Money management, buying an investment property, getting finance sorted, working out how to be a better parent, whatever you want to add that to,
Yep.
you don't need to know everything. And I'm talking to myself, I actually feel like I'm in between 100 and 200. I've reformed on the old perfectionism. I reckon I'm
You're
well and
moving
truly
down the scale. Good
changing
work.
that. Because
I'm coming up a little bit.
a little bit. But there you go, folks. Hopefully that's
That's a cracker.
So,
What
all
we
right,
got today?
mate, we're going to do Q&A day today.
Q&A. Well, it's so good to do Q&A on 199. I mean, we've got our superstar guest next week.
Yep.
So,
Titan.
Titan of money. Titan.
And there's no marketing pitch there. This person is a titan.
Yeah. Best in Australia.
All right. So,
All right. So let's get into it.
Question here from Morella, Ben. When talking about the $2,000 per week income
Yes.
in our book,
Yep.
is this measured before or after outgoings, e.g. rates and land tax, etc.? That's a good question.
It's a great question, not only in the book, but also we do a lot of talks around the country in regards to a passive income for life. Mm-hmm. And we sort of centre it around $2,000 a week or $100,000 a year roughly, which is, above the norm. We definitely know that 80 is a very comfortable retirement, but ultimately we go for that $2,000 per week. Now,
It's aspirational.
yeah, it is aspirational. How we model in terms of the way in which our simulator works is that we measure the cash flow movement, and the $2,000 a week is discretionary money. So our simulator measures that as an expense. Okay, so it allocates that. Now, let's say you did have your $2,000 a week, but you still had some residual debt left over. Because we get this question a lot, and I think we've got another one coming up soon, right? Where we talk about, so it's $2,000 a week plus any interest cost associated with servicing that, plus any maintenance rates and ongoing costs. Okay, so that's how we work it. Now, how we do it, rather than getting it precisely for each property, because if it's future properties we're going to buy when we're doing our planning, is we do 1.5% of the value of the property at the purchase price, and we index that at 3% per annum indefinitely. So in some cases into the future, it looks like it's $40,000, $50,000 a year that we're allocating to maintain that property. So that will cover things like exactly that, the rates, the ongoing fees, any taxation, land tax, those types of things. Now, if you're going to buy it in different entities, such as a company or a trust, your land tax is going to be significantly higher or kicks in earlier. So Most of the property strategies we build are in individual names. Okay, so that's where it does be different. But in terms of what should you be striving for, ultimately you don't want to build $100,000 passive income if your costs are $60,000 a year in terms of your investment costs or maintaining properties or whatever. What you're trying to do is build that as the discretionary amount that you're able to comfortably spend. And if you do it really, really well, what you're also trying to do is not touch the capital base, meaning that you don't have to sell down any of those assets. So you'll find as you build a passive portfolio that you will have the portfolio will move from negatively geared, so a cost where you have to support it, to neutrally geared, to slightly positively geared, and then you start paying more debt down to be more and more positively passive income over time.
That'll come into play in another question we've got later as well. But it's in direct contrast to super, isn't it? Because you're kind of eating your own as you go into super because you've got a return, but sometimes you're eroding the capital base to the point that it eventually goes to zero.
Well,
whereas
ultimately you don't want to. If you build your super up the same way, it's a good story, right? The idea is if you only build a small amount of super or a small nest egg, let's call it a nest egg, because I'm all for making sure that you're making your super work as hard for you. You don't want to leave money on the table there. But we obviously prefer to trap that surplus cash out of the household budget and put it into a leverage investment because we get a better cash-on-cash return.
Plus you get better control. You're not dictated when you can get access to
Correct,
money.
and you can add value to it and you're in complete control.
The point is if someone has super and they haven't quite provisioned enough, eventually it just becomes diminishing. You're getting a return on diminishing amounts. So.
Correct, and all of our models that we try and build here are self-funding models. So we don't build any provision in there for when pensions might kick in. So if you've only been able to build a $250,000 wealth base in retirement and you're 65 and you're going to live to 100, that money is going to be pretty, you're going to use up a lot of that money and then you're going to start getting part pensions and so forth as part of that. Now, everything we're trying to do here is about people self-funding their retirements.
Now, Ben, in the scenario where it's debt-free, and it's $2,000 clear in excess of your expenses, that $2,000 then becomes assessable income.
Yeah. I mean,
so that's
correct.
Not taking out tax, is it?
Correct. So there's some tax that still needs to be paid out of that. But if you think about it, that's the only income that you're earning. So, $100,000, you're sort of talking around that sort of 38 cents in the dollar, depending on, whether there's any Medicare levies or any other taxes or little sort of overdraft things that the government introduce over the next 20 or 30 years. But it's still a very, very healthy level of cash flow.
Now, as a footnote, Ben, we've said it before on the podcast, but we know it's getting increasingly more difficult for everyone to hear every episode on the podcast, is that $2,000 a week needs to be thought about in terms of what you actually need. Some people go, I need $2,000 a week, but some people forget the fact that as you're in your accumulation phase in your working career, you need money for a mortgage and you need money to pay off your investment expenses. What we've just talked about is having ideally no mortgage and having net investment expenses. Yep. So $2,000 a week might be seriously excessive for what your current lifestyle is. You might be able to do it on $1,000 a week or $500 a week, right?
Yep.
So it's important to, we've said it a few times, to know what your number is and to work out how to know what your number is. We might put the link to Know Your Number, one of the how-to videos I've done on that, Ivis, to make it nice and easy. So that was a good question from Morella. Thank you very much. This one here, Ben, is from James. Trying to build a property portfolio whilst the future of interest rates and a change in government could potentially impact the market. How should one approach 2019?
I think it's the same way in which I approach any year. When I invest for the long term. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I don't really necessarily need to speculate in regards to how I'm looking at things. There's no doubt that you need to take into consideration that a change in government and a change in legislation could potentially impact the market. So if that is the case, and we're hearing that the Labor Party, if they do get into power, haven't announced when they would introduce the negative gearing legislation and whether it'll get through the Senate. And the latest readings I've had on it from an article that I read last night was that the senior Labor member has said 1 July 2019. So that's the latest bit of information that I've heard. Now, if we go to an election in May, we actually won't be sitting in Parliament until around August. So I don't know, whether the Senate will have an appetite for it. So that is a challenge. But so my view on that is, how would I be doing it? I would be preparing now for an early strike in 2019. Like, if I'm in a financial position where I want to get an investment property and I want to get an investment grade property, which is usually in our case very much so an existing property, I would be focused in on that story, and I'd be getting my ducks lined up and getting my planning work done very early, so even late this year or early into the year, and then I'd be striking.
Because you raise a very good point there, Ben, because a lot of people think, okay, I want to buy a property in April, so I start thinking about it at the end of March. But it's property investing is a process, not an event, and that process has a long lead time. And to get that lead time right, we need to be thinking nowish, right? Because you don't want to be in a position, so this question to James, you don't want to be in a position where you're going to buy a property prior to the change in the rules, because you want to take advantage of the grandfathered arrangement, where you have just stacked yourself up with a 100%, 200% increase in people who want the inquiries that are all meeting this artificial deadline, which creates a mini boom-like condition, which means that you'll end up paying more for the investment-grade properties, all because of the interest. So it's about being contrarian. Is a contrarian the right one, where you've got to think a little bit differently to everyone else and move back as far back as you can to get that runway that you talked about. But don't put yourself into a situation where you're leaving it to the last minute, which is human nature. And putting you in a situation where you've just got this artificial competition.
Look, and I think, irrespective of where the Labor get in and where the legislation lands, because, as I said, they are definitely not going to back away from it, right? Because they're banking on all of that money that they think that they're going to earn, which won't materialise, so we'll all have to pay higher GST, but that's another story for another day, right? They're banking all that money for their election pledges.
Do you not think that, because you and I have talked about that a couple of times, at some point someone will listen to what you said, they're not going to get the money that they want. Someone senior will
but they're not
create a scenario where because this is just madness at this point in time.
They don't want that story told, Bryce. So once you're in power, it's easy to say, I'm sorry, we've overspent and we don't have the revenue coming in. It's all about being
in power. Everything's about being in
power. So what you've got to do is go to Treasury, because like in an election time, they've got to try and justify their costings and so forth. Now, this is giving them a massive war chest, right? So they've got to stick with it, because if they don't, there's a massive hole, right? And Labor don't have a great record in terms of economic management and in jobs growth. Now, again, I voted Labor all my life, up until the last couple of elections, and some of the greatest managers we've ever seen in terms of running the economy were Hawke Keating. So full respect there, re-engineered the economy, did some amazing legwork, introduced super, so some good stuff there. But in terms of schools, jobs, schools, health, all of those things cost an enormous amount of money. Right, an enormous amount of money, and ultimately he's expecting the tax receipts to pay for all of those pledges. So that's the challenge they've got, right? So the politics of this is bigger than the actual policy. So if they get in and they can't change it, then it's like, oh, we're sorry, we're just going to have a bigger deficit, right? And that's never any good, and that's what we said, But the reality is, once they also see what it does to the economy, they may also have to reverse out of it anyway.
So that's my point. But I think you've answered the question that if they change their mind, they'll do it post an election win, not pre an election win. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, you are not going to see them say,
sure.
And in a lot of parts of the economy, Bryce, it actually resonates. But people are now starting to see their property prices fall. And so I think what people need to understand is it's not like my investment property next to your owner-occupied property, next to the other owner-occupied property, and then the other. It's like, my property doesn't just drop. Everyone's does, right? So, if you're talking about wiping out billions of dollars, if not, maybe even $100 billion of value across the Australian property market, this is a good policy to do that, right? This is a good policy to do that. And then starve an economy that may be slowing of confidence. This is a good policy to do that too. People don't get it, and we're hearing commentary.
And cause rentals to increase.
That's a good policy. That is a lay down misère, right? There is absolutely no doubt that rents will go up, 100%, 100%, because supply will drain, but also you've introduced a cost that we now can't recoup moving forward. So any future rentals that we're going to put on the market, first of all, we're going to be super selective in terms of how we put on it based on the changes that are happening from the Tenancy Act. And we're going to, there's going to be a premium to live in the areas that, the good properties that we buy, right? So that is the challenge. Now, you might say, well, they'll just move on to the next property or the next property or the next property. But
everyone's doing it.
Everyone's going to be sort of saying, well, it's a bit unfair. It's a 25, 30% drop in terms of the income that I'm going to earn. Now, I'm not saying that every investor is going to then put up their rents by 30%. But I'd be surprised. I'd be surprised if they didn't put it up 10 or 15%. That's only fair, right? I've got to pass on my costs. So and that is the frustrating bit about what they're saying. It's grandfathered, so it doesn't affect your property. Well, yeah, it does, because when I bought that property 12 years ago, I was under the guise that this would be in play, right? So I've got a 20, 30, 40-year investment going on here, and you're changing the rules. Right, and not just a little rule, it's a fundamental principle of businesses can do it, everyone can do it, and now you're changing that tax legislation that's been around for 100 years just for investors, just on property and shares. It doesn't make sense. And the government are letting out that they're missing out on this tax. Yeah, it may be the forward bit of the tax that they're missing out on, but over time, as we said, we're not selling these things, right? So they're going to get it in terms of the tax receipts that they're going to get in passive income later on.
Win the battle, lose the war.
Yeah,
good question, exactly. James. Hopefully that helps you. So you've got a long run up. Don't wait for it. Don't get caught in a big crush towards the end if people start madly trying to buy properties at the same period of time to get that grandfathered rule. So there we go. This one's from Nipper Ben. I feel confident with how to select investment grade properties, but I'm not so sure on how to get to the cash flow stage. Do you propose changing loans to P&I, selling down some properties to then pay off the debt of others, or something else? Cheers, Nipper. It really comes down to horses for courses, doesn't it?
It's case by case, really.
Because in a perfect world, the idea is that you have growth properties first that do the heavy lifting to build the wealth base. Then you have balanced assets that sort of shift that growth and increase the income. And then ultimately you have some income assets to pay out the debt. That's the idea. The idea is to keep interest-only loans throughout the entire accumulation phase. And then as you move to retirement phase, you want to have P&I, particularly if there's a disparity between, as there is now, between owner-occupiers and investors. But the idea is, in a perfect world, to hold 3 to 5 really good properties through the accumulation phase to pay them off, so that you're holding them in retirement, increasing the wealth base and using the passive income to fund your lifestyle. But it depends when you get started, Ben.
It's the levers,
Bryce. Depends on your
income,
risk aversion,
expenditure, time and target, Nipper. So when I look at that question, I say, well, if you want to retire earlier, then the consequences of retiring earlier will mean that you may have to sell down one of those properties if you want to be debt free. You heard me before saying in several of our models that we do, and we do obviously a lot of models for clients, right? Hundreds and hundreds of models each year. In terms of, or plans really is what they are, in terms of what we're looking at there, we're basically saying to ourselves is, if you work another 3 or 4 years, you break the back of the debt and the debt's retired out and you're gone. But if you want to retire earlier, you might have to liquidate one property, pay the taxes that you need to pay, including the capital gains tax, and then that's put a big dent in the debt, and that gives you a nice little buffer, and that might trade you through for another 4 or 5 years before you need to go back to that well, if there's still some debt that you want to pay out, or if there's still a level of living standard that you want that the passive investment income isn't delivering you on the remaining properties that you've got. So it absolutely is a case by case when it comes to looking at your circumstances. And they are the 4 things we're looking at. What's your income? What's your expenditure? How long have you got? And what are you trying to achieve in that time? They are the 4 big levers that we get to play with. And that's why every plan that we do is uniquely personalised in terms of each person's situation. So we can't just say, I can give you some rule of thumbs. Here we go. Accumulation phase, interest only. Right, that's our goal. And what you were saying before, once you finish that off, start paying down the debt. So if some of those loans switch over to P&I, they switch over to P&I. If you still need that surplus because money's tight, reset your loan out P&I to 30 years. Right, so you're still paying P&I, and it still might be credit critical, so there's still going to be some judgment around whether you can get that loan done. What we don't want to see you do is get yourself in a situation where you go super aggressively and everything rolls out into P&I. So one of the things that APRA has done for all of us is it sort of said it's going to be a boring stage to wealth. And that's pretty much been our approach anyway, in terms of being able to buy 4 or 5 properties over 15, 20 years.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so hopefully that helps, Nipper. Good question. I got one here from Kathika. Thanks. Quick question. There's a lot of media activity discussing the impending drop in property prices over the next few years. As a result, my husband and I are worried about investing now in the event we could buy for cheaper in a year. What are your thoughts?
Look, this is a consistent question during these times. I take a really important view on this, and that is I've been through 6 of these cycles now, so I can see where I see buying opportunities. If a great property comes up, right, on a great street, and I've always wanted to own a scarce asset, with character and charm, then I would be absolutely stupid not to buy that when others are fearful. You're not going to know the bottom.
No.
You're not going to know when the bottom's there. So, let's say you buy that property for $830,000 and then 6 months later, 8 months later, the market's indicating that it's worth around $790. Right? Big deal. Right? Because then in 4 or 5 or 6 years' time, when the market's indicating it's worth $1 million, it's like, was that a bad decision? I don't think it was.
Yeah, the compounding effect of that's pretty good, isn't it, Ben? Because you're right, because you can buy A++ properties now, and the compounding impact of that will outweigh the impact, because you'll never pick the bottom. So if your cash flow allows for you to buy something now, buy the best assets you possibly can, because I don't think the market's going to fall out.
No.
But in some places it's giving back. But our team, for example, is making sure that we're not buying in areas that are giving back. But we're still going to auctions and we're still missing.
We've got a couple of strategies, don't we, Bryce? We've got the counter-cyclical strategy, which we're using in marketplaces where we know that they're proven performers, they're rare earth environments, they're $1 million strips in terms of the types of properties that we're buying in those areas and the locations in which we're buying. But we've also, we're boardless investors. So we do know that property prices are going stronger in Adelaide. We're buying in Adelaide. We do know property prices are going stronger in Brisbane. We're buying in Brisbane. So we're in cycles where there's still, consistent uplift. And it comes down to the confidence of the buyer. I was speaking to a potential client only yesterday, and what the conversation with that particular client was, Melbourne or Sydney. And I said, they're both going down. He's like, which one? And I said, well, Sydney, 2 million is going to get you this, 1.5 million is going to get you that. So it was obviously someone who had a little bit of coin. And we were sort of juggling what that story looked like. Now, in both cases, I'm very comfortable in buying in both of those markets for the longer term. And that's just an evidence of, we've always said, ideally, we'd love you to have at least one property in at least one of those locations in your portfolio, because they're our 2 knowledge centres. They're the 2 centres that are going to attract the biggest and brightest and the best talent. They're going to attract the highest incomes. There's going to be pressure on land. They're going to have big population growth. That's all the story we're talking about.
At the World Cities, it's interesting if you go back to our previous podcast where we called it, say, tap out of Sydney, but then it kept running. What you find now is some of that that's giving back in Sydney is pretty much going back to where we said tap out. We said it a little earlier, and there was a bit of run to go. But the idea is you're not going to ever be able to pick the bottom. You can pick really great assets now if your cash flow says that you can still afford it. That's your biggest concern.
Yeah.
That if you can or cannot cash flow the property, and the compounding benefits of superior assets over time are fast.
Scarce assets, great locations. That's what we're about. For growth assets. For balanced assets, we want to be waterside or somewhere where there's always strong demand for good rental accommodation. So we'll go to lifestyle areas for those. And then if we're chasing little cash cows, we will go regional, right? We'll go regional. And if you've got a little bit more high risk profile, we'll even go into some of the more lifestyle towns that have mining opportunities. And we will do that because it's the right brief for the right customer, and it's case by case.
And despite those negative headlines, particularly for you folk in Sydney or New South Wales that are getting smashed by it, our team is in very, very competitive markets. They're still buying great properties because they're taking that borderless view. So even though you're being saturated by headlines in Sydney, there are other markets to invest in. So good question, Kathika.
If you're a first home buyer, and we're pretty consistent on this message as well, so if you're sitting back and you want to buy a lifestyle asset out in the burbs, in a new estate, then I would absolutely say do not buy.
Yeah.
Right. I'm pretty confident in Melbourne and Sydney to keep saving.
Yep.
Right. If this is an owner-occupied asset, why would I be paying interest on something that's not going to be moving?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if I'm in an investment mindset, it's like, well, that's all right. You know, it's part of what I'm trying to do. I'm not, you know, we won't go out wide and we won't go and buy those cheapies in the new development areas where land is oversupplied and you know, potentially the building boom is going to stop because there's no demand there now. I would definitely say for those people who are looking for those lifestyle assets close to family and friends on the fringes of a city, keep saving.
Yeah, because the fail-safe is the fact that we are politically stable with a population growth that's going to be 35 million by 2050. Like, you know, we're highly concentrated in these urbanised areas on the coastal regions, particularly on the East Coast. So lots of people, like that's the friend of growth, not the enemy of growth.
Yep.
So if we are no longer importing people, interest rates go up, you know, unemployment goes to the moon, that's when you start to worry. So,
but great question, because they're the ones that's on people's minds, right? It's on people's minds in terms of what that looks like.
And that will always be on people's minds.
Always.
So
same approach to shares. Should I buy those shares? Or like, what when the market's down? Should I get out?
Yeah.
Like the behaviour is get out when it's crashing, right?
The point is you want to be in it for as long as you can. So don't give yourself another artificial excuse to procrastinate, right? So,
you're not buying the property market just like you're not buying the share market unless you're in an index fund, right? Mm-hmm. You're buying the company, and you've got to look at that company and you've got to say, what is it about that company that gives them a unique point of difference, a competitive advantage, a moat around the services they provide, and gives them an ability to charge more to get a great profit. That's where share value increases in shares. When it comes to property, you know, are those great locations going to turn into poor locations? No. You know, are they going to be? Is there going to be a ripple effect of people coming into those locations where there's lots of homeless and needy people? No. Right. All of these things say that the fundamentals are still perfectly sound in that area. It's just the sentiment and the confidence has shifted, and that's when the great opportunities for buying present themselves.
Back yourself. If you've got cash flows, you've got buffers, and you're not going to sleep with one eye open at night, back yourself and buy the best assets you possibly can. Question here from Dan. You mentioned using equity. If you don't yet have access to equity, what tips can you give to get started? But I'll give you the tip that I did on my first one. I went into partnership with someone else. Had a good income. I didn't have the equity, and we went in together.
Equity, so obviously, if you're going into partnership, we always talk about getting download a buy-sell agreement so everyone knows what the playing field is in terms of what that looks like. Obviously, some other tips there. You've got family. You could potentially do a parental guarantee or family guarantee if they do have security and they want to get you on the property ladder sooner. The other one is be ruthless around your spending. Save that deposit. Remember, in some cases, you can get into the market with only a 5% deposit. All right. So, and that's also investing, right? So it's really important to understand that if if this is a really important thing you want to do, save, because you're still going to need that surplus income to get the borrowing power anyway. So you've got the income coming in. So just be ruthless and sacrifice 6 months, 12 months, whatever it takes to get that $50,000, $30,000, $40,000 deposit to get you started.
And we've talked about side hustles before, so get another job to top that up too. So good question. Thank you, Dan. This one's from Costa, Ben. Do you ever recommending using some equity release to pay the monthly repayments to improve your cash flow?
Well, so, I mean, that sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it? In terms of, wait a minute, I'm borrowing money to service debt. So the answer to that is if I'm consolidating higher repayment debt, which is reducing my commitments each month, which is increasing my surplus, and I'm slowing down there so people can comprehend what I'm trying to talk about, then I'm going to improve my borrowing power. Okay, and in some cases, that works. All right, in terms of, do I live off equity? No way known. I'm not interested in living off equity. I have buffers, absolutely, because effectively when you've got a portfolio of property and you've got a couple of $1 million in debt, you are living off that debt, right? You're just parking the money in offsets and you've got some emergency capital in behind you. But in real terms, consolidating debt, minimising credit cards, reducing that to be able to get some more access to more borrowing is sensible if you can make that money work for you.
Now there is a strategy out there, Bet, to use debt to service debt so that you can retire on the debt harvesting. So it actually works, right? And I know people who are doing it.
Yeah.
But the challenge is for the average person, it's challenging because you need a big enough portfolio to ride through. Because you think about right now, you've got a credit crunch. You're white knuckle through a credit crunch whilst you're doing that, and in a lower growth environment. So it works when it's booming, and it works when easy access to credit. But when it's a difficult access to credit, and you are facing, the headline level low growth over the next couple of years, that's when you start to get nervous about that particular strategy. So it's not one that we recommend. It's not conservative. It's aggressive, but there are people who are doing it, and it does work. So just for clarity,
you'll come unstuck though. I mean, it's working for them right now. But if they've got a P&I switchover or a credit critical interest only rollover, it's not going to work for them. Like, they might be justifying it, in their commentary or whatever, saying it's still working for me. I was still able to get it. If you've got a really low loan to value ratio, if you've got a really, really low loan to value ratio, it can work, right? But if you're geared at 60 or 70% and you've got a rollover and you've got to do credit critical stuff, I promise you, the jury will, you're slowly hanging to the noose.
Well, the people who are doing it are the people with the high profiles, and they've got significant enough portfolios that a small amount of growth on their portfolio is well in excess of the money that they've pulled out to fund a lifestyle. So it works at that top end, but building up in a current environment.
But they just will not be able to get the borrowing capacity based on the new servicing assessments that are happening. So it's a dead strategy for people who want to try and use that now, in my view. But there are people who are on legacy components of that who might have had a 10-year interest-only period, and so they haven't had to go back to get some new credit. Or they might be getting private funding, which is super aggressive, solicitor funding or that type of thing. We would know that people do that, but I tell you what, it's super aggressive, and it's not something we would recommend anyone do.
So there you go, folks. Thanks for the question from Morella, from James, from Nipper, from Dan, from Costa, and from Kathika. Really, really good questions. All right, mate, my life hack today is for the frequent travellers, Ben. I was on a plane recently and I was allocated a seat in the middle, which is not ideal. And so I went up and I just went and said to the lady, look, I know it's probably right at the desk as we're about to board. I know it's probably tough for this request, but is there any chance I can get an aisle or a window seat? And she just went through on the computer and put me through on an aisle seat in the emergency, right? And it was the premium X part of the process. So anyone who has any form of frequent flyer badge, other than the standards, Ben, that was a way for me to make sure that I got through at the last minute. They were leading up to it. They would have charged me because I actually did do that. But with 10-15 seconds to go before I had to board, it allowed me to get on an aisle seat, which was for those of our listeners, and Ben, who are frequent flyers, just being stuck in the middle is not ideal unless you like that sort of thing.
Good message there. If you don't ask, you don't get. If you don't ask, you don't. And I mean, what's the worst thing they can say is no.
And I didn't want to die wondering. So there you go. That's my life hack for the frequent travellers. Ben, did you know?
Did you know? So, we're on this crusade, Bryce, around encouraging and educating people around money and money management and financial attitudes and behaviours. So a couple of stats, just to let everybody know. 59% of people in Australia pay their credit card balance in full each month.
Wow, that's actually higher than I probably would have thought right now.
Yeah, but so 59, so that's 60%, but that's still 40. That's 40 in every 100. That's there's a living in that for the banks, right? They're making billions out of you. All right, so that needs to be higher. That needs to be 95%. Right. Next one, 35% of people know the exact value of their super. 35%. Right. So 35 people out of 100 know what their super balance is. Come on, people. Know the balance of your super. Also, know what strategy you've got your super invested in. Very important.
It is your money
on the table.
It's not some artificial person just
money on the table.
It's your money.
Bryce, 40% understand the concept of diversification. That's less than half. So the concept of diversification, when we talk about it, is absolutely you've got super. How we diversify in property is we buy properties in different states and so forth, but the full concept is not all your eggs in one basket, okay? So that's still understanding that concept or being educated about that. Finally, Bryce, 53% pay more than the minimum amount due on their mortgage.
Ooh.
That's a good sign.
Yeah, it's over half.
That's over half. I'd like to see that at 75%, unless you've got that money working for you in accumulating wealth, right?
Unless they're following the money smarts, Ben.
Yeah, money smarts make money simple again, Bryce. Absolutely. A little book plug there, and get on the platform if you haven't checked it out. But 53%. So
propertycouch.com/financial peace, Ben.
love it. Thank you for that link there, Bryce. Beautiful, because I wouldn't have remembered it. So that's 53%. Let's get that number higher. Let's get that household debt down, unless that money is being used to create wealth, accumulating assets, appreciating values. That's how it's done.
I did not know that, Ben. Well done. Great stats. Good research. I'm impressed by the preparation that you've done towards the back end of the 200. Because at the front end, there wasn't as much preparation.
No good early.
Well, it's good. You just did.
Did you know early, mate? If you remember, if you can recall.
Well, from 100 onwards.
80 odd. That was
But I was like 100 to 150 is probably last minute, whereas 150 to 200.
What do you want me to go back to? Saying goodbye and all that? No, that's not happening.
Well, we did get a review.
Who knows?
We did get a review that said it made people's ears bleed. I wonder if they were referring to that. So
yeah, the podcast made you. Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah,
our competitor.
We appreciate that. So there you go, folks. Did not know that, but mate, I wonder if you remember this after 199 episodes.
Finally getting it right.
Until next week.
Knowledge is empowering, Bryce, but only if you act on it.
Very true. See you next week, folks.